All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Around the Bird Bath. As always, I'm your host and got a little bit of a different episode for you today, kind of a three-part. We're going to combine Turn In Tuesdays. We're going to do our second annual conference roundup ahead of conference play. And then we're going to preview the thing I've been looking forward to basically ever since it got released that it was going to happen and when I first heard it was happening. But uh, to open up the very first play in conference AAC conference play for UTSA, facing the best of the best, the ECU Pirates. And I thought no better way to talk about the best of the best than by having the best of the best on. So asked Jared and Adrian to take time out of their busy schedule and all the content they're pushing on their side to join us. But uh gentlemen, how we doing tonight?
Doing excellent, doing fantastic. Happy to talk some baseball with you, Dan, and it's always a pleasure to be a guest on your show around the bird bath.
Yeah, Dan, best of the best. You have far surpassed us when it comes to baseball. There's no denying who the Babe Ruth of UTSA baseball coverage is these days. So thank
Mm,
you for having us on your podcast.
Well, we got to be
the
careful when we
great,
talk about Babe Ruth because a lot of people think that he wouldn't succeed in modern baseball. So,
All right, the Otani
the
of
great, the great
well,
Dan Vito.
hey, Otani's in the news right now too. It just dropped today. That's been his mentions have been as busy as mine have lately.
Let's
Um,
stick with Babe Ruth. I like the great Dan Bino.
there you
that's
go.
good.
Well, Ray Redding, friend of the pod and big money donor, and we'll get to our Patreon shout outs here in a second. Ray kind of coined the Danimal, and I was going to have some segments this season and call them Danimal crackers.
Nice.
But you can't appoint your own like nickname, right? So like I
Yeah.
I haven't incorporated yet, and now it's out there, so maybe now I have to. But
Is that why you
um,
had us on so we can appoint it for you?
no, 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 no. I'm not that. Yeah. Um,
No, I think it's super whack when like radio hosts like give themselves nicknames and segments and stuff like that.
yeah, and we won't
It's
mention
something that
any
has to be
specifics,
earned.
but yeah, no, for
Yeah,
sure.
it's more reserved for a DJ than it is like an AM talk radio guy, right? You can't just
Mhm.
Yeah, like we
christen
call our
yourself.
listeners the dome heads, but I don't think Adrian came up with that. I think like the listeners made it up and we just ran with it.
Yeah, yeah, we need to even get like, I mean, I don't know, something to wear, like like have people wear it into the stadium, like when they go to the games, like some type of dome, like a variation of a cone, but I don't know. We'll workshop it. We'll get it over to Aaron.
I thought that was gonna be a
Um,
segue to a store ad. We'll save that. We'll save that. We'll
yeah,
workshop that one.
we'll save that one for the end, so people have to listen to the very end of this in 3 hours when we finally get there.
Oh
But
Lord.
we're gonna be talking about. So I already mentioned we're gonna be recapping the crazy what seemed like more of a spring football game than a baseball game. The I-35 rivalry last night against Texas State. That game was almost 4 hours. We're gonna be talking about the conference roundup, and then we're gonna be looking at the ECU preview pretty traditionally with how I've done it. And if you're not on Patreon, that's where you can find those. So encourage you as if you are interested in that. I basically break down, UTSA's history with the team, how the team is doing, how the experts expect that team to fare this year in terms of like conference championships and regionals, and then give a quick look at some of their better players to watch out for. If you would have listened to if you would have caught it, and the midweek games are a little different. But if you would have read the blog recap, you would have seen in the Texas State recap, Dalen Pena and how much of a force he can be, and we'll certainly talk about him. But before we do all that, mention Patreon. Definitely want to take a moment and uh let you know how much we appreciate your support on Patreon. It allows us to do things like this. It allows us to work NIL deals. It allows, Jared and Adrian to bring in special guests and help deliver the incredible content that they've been producing. And, we've been teasing the store a little bit on Twitter and some of the new baseball items coming very soon. Outstanding work on the creative side of things with Aaron and everyone coming together on that. But um, you know, starting off with our board of trustees, Digitique, John Outwell, Lino Perez of Los Dos Rowdies Tailgating, Gary and Ruben representing the UTSA Bird Gang Tailgate, Ray Redding and Meet Me Apparel, Brandon Grill and the Grill Realty Group, Andy Elizalde and Proficient Benefit Solutions, Ian McClendon and Seeker LLC, Ryan Squires, Waterman Construction, Javon Townsend, VP of the DFW chapter of the UTSA Alumni Association, UTSA Annual Giving, and Artisan Vapor and CBD. And of course, our big money donors, Ben Tovar, the Bunch family, Zach Esper-Quetta, and the San Antonio Podcast Network, Alejandro Benavides, Jacob Cavazos, board president for the UTSA Alumni Association, John Nally, Brandon Padron, and Rick Cortez of Rowdy Road Grillers. And of course, all right, so let's get into the crazy. I mean, that was one of the craziest games I've ever seen. You know, they say every
That
day
was
you
one
go
of the
to the
craziest
ballpark.
innings I've ever seen, Dan.
Yeah. So I guess let's start there. A 60-minute first inning, 13 combined runs score. You know, UTSA is looking like they're going to get off to a Tuesday thrashing like they did last year. And then bottom of the first comes along, and all of a sudden it's 9-4 out of nowhere. I mean, insane.
Absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. The bats were back and forth, but what an insanely emotional roller coaster to see. And it sucks that it has to be in San Marcos of all places, but just insane to see a 13-run first inning. I mean, it really looked like UTSA had it, but look, man, it goes back and forth. It's a game of momentum. And I think we saw momentum shift. Gosh, I don't know how many times throughout this game. Maybe it's just as many runs that were scored at the end of the day, 25. So it was brutal. At the end of the day, it's brutal. It's a brutal one to hang your hat on, especially as you're going into conference play and you're going to play arguably one of your best opponents of the season, maybe your best opponent of the season going over to East Carolina or facing up against East Carolina. So it's a tough one. It's a tough emotional one. And you're a game under 500, you're going into conference play. You know, the UTSA baseball didn't really have any momentum to carry us in to this part of the schedule now.
Yeah, I had to go through the Winsipedia page for UTSA versus Texas State in football to see if this had surpassed any football matchups in history. But all those games have been relatively high scoring. So maybe someday there will be a Bobcat Roadrunner baseball game that outscores the football contest. Seems inevitable, but no dice so far. I think like my takeaway from this game was how much like that crooked, what do they call it? Like a crooked number inning can kill you. Texas State only scored their runs in 2 innings. They had 9 in the first and then 5 in the third. That is all. No, I've never seen anything like it. It's nuts.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it, you know, because I'm not so on one side of the coin, you know, Ryan Beard has been pretty consistently, I think every midweek game, he's been the guy that goes out there. Mm-hmm. And traditionally throughout this season, he's had a really good first inning, maybe struggled at the end of the first inning, and then up to this point, he's gotten into the second inning. They give him the second inning, and that's where things kind of start to get a little more trickier for him. And sometimes he works through 2 full innings. Sometimes he just has an inning and a third inning and 2/3. This time, totally different. They started hitting right away, having a hard time finding the strike zone. The umpire was, I thought initially the ump did have a really tight strike zone, and he was kind of positioned a little further back, almost a foot off the plate or off the catcher, and that was a little different. But I almost wonder, and I can get your guys' thoughts on this, but I mean, the game started at 6. UTSA probably had a 25 to 30 minute top of the first inning. So you're going through your reps, and you've got your, you know, pitchers more than anyone are just creatures of habit and a very regimented routine. So you finish that up, but then you're just sitting there for 30 minutes and you haven't even had a half inning to throw and get some work in. So I wonder if that long start is what got Ryan kind of off his set a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. That's a really good point. I know, especially for guys that are going to start a game, they always have a super specific routine that they do, and you just never expect to be sitting on the bench for that long. So maybe they should have done, you know, some long toss, you know, in that middle of the first or whatever. Ryan Beard's poor outing was one thing, but what really struck me was Braylon Owens having Such a poor performance, giving up 6 runs, only recording 1 out. He'd been pretty lights out this season. I don't have his season stats in front of me, but I feel like he's been one of the best pitchers, the whole staff this season. So it was really surprising for me. But I think also to that point, I mean, he's not really the scenario that he expected to enter this ball game into. So I think from a mental standpoint, it's tough for sure.
Yeah, no, I think you make a good point, Dan. It's a funky thing to have to go through and then to get reaccustomed to, readjusted, especially from a mental standpoint. But look, I mean, some nights just don't have it. I think that's sort of what we saw. I mean, there at the beginning, and then we sort of settled in a little bit too late, right? It just kind of took us a little bit while to find that groove. And I don't know if that's one of those things where the rivalry creates strange happenings. Maybe you're really psyched out to go to San Marcos and to play. You've kind of been in and out all season, right? You're struggling for 500. And now going into conference play, you're trying to get psyched out to go up against a rivalry matchup and to have a really good showing and maybe just get too far ahead of yourself coming out. And UTSA, I think, had to slow down, take a breath, and we were already in a hole that was a little bit too deep at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I will counter that a little bit. They got it off to their own groove pretty quick. They had back-to-back 4-run innings, and then of the 27 total runs scored, 22 came through the first 3 innings. By both teams. And so it was, I mean, the ball was flying early and, anytime the two things I think overall, and I'll get to this more in a minute, that contributed were 2 grand slams by the same player. The first one, sure, the guy's been, he's had an incredibly hot bat as of late. Second time around, you've kind of clawed your way back, right? And you've got a unfortunate bases loaded situation after a few walks, but I mean, why? I don't know why you pitched to him in that situation. I'm not a huge proponent of the bases loaded walk because I think baseball karma has a funny way of working itself out. But I mean, I think you got to tell Zach Longshore, like, you don't throw Pena anything close in that second at bat.
Yeah, and I think that's really what I'm getting at is defensively a little into our heads. The bats were flying in the first 2 innings, but the fact that those bases get loaded 2 times like that, right? And Pena gets all the way around the lineup to hit 2 of them on us in the first inning. I mean, look, there's no reason, and it's a combination. And sure, some balls will hit some spots where a guy's going to get on base, can't do anything about that. But I mean, between the pitching and then decision making, like you're talking about, Dan, you can walk the guy, take the one instead of having to chance it again. He's got a hot bat. Those are the type of things. And I think typically we see Hallmark more often than not trust his guys in these type of scenarios, leave his guys on, let them go ahead and pitch, let them go for it. And, that's kind of in his nature, especially in the out of conference play. But even I mean, I don't know, we've seen him do it in really important games too. So, it's just kind of what you're going to see from Hallmark. And I'm fine with fans having a little bit of pushback on that management style. Whenever something is, blatantly obvious, you do got to make a move, or at least not be so hesitant to. But I understand trusting your guys, let them go and let them get better. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we want to get the W, and a 500 team, maybe you have to be a little more strict with that. And whenever you've got so much youth on the team, maybe you've got to be a little more strict with that.
Yeah, I mean, and baseball is still, like you hear guys call it a game of failure, right? Like you get into the Hall of Fame failing 7 out of 10 times. There's other things that go into it, and even Pena, I think those were his only 2 hits on the night. Yeah, he walked once, but out of 5 at bats, he still recorded 2 outs, one of which was a strikeout. So like the game's going to work itself back around. Do you guys care to take a gander and guess at how many walks UTSA allowed last night?
Man, I'm gonna guess 10.
11.
Oof.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah,
I feel like most of them were in the first 2 innings.
Yeah.
Yeah, first 3 probably because that was what so like Beard opened, Braylon came in, and he kept like kind of flicking his wrist a little bit. I don't know if he was trying to work something out or just the ball wasn't moving the way he wanted to. But then Cooper Herbacek came in, and I was excited about that because Cooper coming into last night's game, he'd only thrown about 5 innings and hadn't been given anything more than an inning up to this point of work, but had a 0 ERA going into last night. Had some nasty stuff, had an incredible off speed pitch, and had a huge jump from his fastball to his off speed, but he walked in his in his in his in his first full inning of work, he walked three consecutive batters, and then Coach Hallmark went to Longshore, and so yeah, most of those walks probably came in the first three innings.
And Dan, you mentioned earlier that you thought the strike zone was a little tight. I mean, from watching the ESPN Plus stream at home, it didn't feel egregious to me. Like
Okay,
maybe not super generous to the pitcher, but I mean, I thought those pitches were missing for the
yeah,
most part. So
okay, and
not
that and
UTSA's day on the mound.
yeah, and different angles, of course. I kind of had a weird. I was kind of a little higher up than I normally sit, a little more down the baseline, so that might have been it too. But
Speaking of which, your first trip to San Marcos for a baseball game, right?
yeah,
Yeah, tell us
listen,
more. Go on, go on.
listen. It was Greek night.
Oh
So
Oh my
no.
God.
yeah. So I was standing up like at the very top of the bleachers talking to a few people, and then I actually ran into a friend of the pod now, T Texas Tony Turnstile. He was there with the previous owner of the Seguin River Monsters. So I went down and was talking to them, and then quickly all of these Texas State students started encompassing me, and I'm like, oh geez. And I mean, and this was probably at the start of the bottom of the first. So like when the bleeding was at its worst is when all of these students are coming in. And I mean they're cracking up. I've never been around Texas State students. The only time I've been at like, I mean, yeah, I didn't go to the game last year at the Bird Bath. It wasn't as many students from Texas State. And then the football game, like it was in the Alamo Dome. So this was my first experience. I mean, they were rowdy. I'll give them a little kudos. They were rowdy. They were razzing. They were getting people going. But I started chirping back a little bit
Mm.
when UTSA started hitting their three home runs and they had their own productive inning. And yeah, it was just a little playful banter. And I think the person that advised me to quiet down a little bit, we'll put that
Mm.
nicely. I think it was
Mm.
more for my own protection because I think they saw that I was greatly outnumbered with the Texas. But I will say this: after Matt King's home run, which I think was the third home run of the inning, I did get a little kind of a head nod from some of the students, like, all right, that's respectable. Like, we see you, we see you.
Nice. Okay.
And I told him, I said, listen, this series is always crazy, especially in
Yeah.
San Marcos. Like you'll have these games where it's like 16-7, and then one of the teams goes and scores 8 runs in an inning, and all of a sudden it's a football game, you know?
Pretty savage of Texas State to put Greek night for UTSA game.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
savage move.
yeah,
They didn't need the attendance boost, you know?
right, yeah. It was, and most of them left after the third inning, so it kind of quieted down a little bit
Yeah,
again.
you got to get the Chimmy's Tuesday deal, you know, 2 for 1
Mm.
margaritas, whatever they do.
Yeah.
They
Um,
reported just a hair under 2,000 for attendance. Does that feel legit to you?
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate. I mean, that
Nice.
it was filled up, it was loud. And I just saw actually they're playing A&M here in a few weeks, and they just sold that game out.
Yeah, I
They
saw
just
that.
posted today that it's sold out. So kudos to them. I mean, they've got a potent lineup for sure. The other thing I
Wow.
wanted to talk about, and Adrian kind of pointed this, it still seems like there's like the two things that still seem to be lacking, and I'm a little concerned now because we're a month into the season. The consistency of just like from game to game, but then also there's just a lack of chemistry on the field. Like there was one play where Braylon Owens made a great PFP from the mound, and Olivo was just late to the bag, just froze, and that costs an out, and and then they went home and tried to get the runner after the runner at first was safe. But there just seems to be some just confusion on. And then there was one play too where it was a pop fly on the left side of the infield, and Olivo was like all the way over at the pitcher's mound. And it's like Matt King and Hector Rodriguez are over there. You don't need to be over there, you know? So that's kind of hurt him a few times. And it's something that I'd be curious kind of how they plan to, it might just be working it out and getting more used to playing with each other. But that was a little concerning.
Has Olivo been playing first base much this season? Or I feel like he's been DHing a lot, right?
Yeah, it's been a healthy mix. Him and Tauser are kind of the 1-2 punch there,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of like last night, James Tausig was the DH, and Olivo was at first base, but they've kind of been going back and forth a little bit.
Yeah, you talk about the lack of consistency and lack of chemistry, and they kind of go hand in hand, right? But it does seem like we haven't been able to see this team get hot, go on a run, really put things together, start to find the grooves, find the flow. And when you're watching them, and I think really more so defensively than anything else, yeah, it does seem to be like they're not quite in sync on a regular basis. And it's those small little things, man. It's those small little things that, especially in a game like this, getting into conference play, that create all the difference. And these tight games are not going to be something that goes away anytime soon. I think we're going to continue to see it. All teams are putting up a lot of hits, a lot of runs. And so where you're going to create that separation is being able to field properly, being able to pitch properly. Dan, what do you credit that to?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Like the lack of consistency, the lack of chemistry. What do you sort of point at whenever you watch this team?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it's like you look at the infield. I mean, you've got a true freshman playing second base. He's got a great glove. He's got a great glove. Like, and he had a big moment last night. I think Diego's got a lot of upside, but he's a true
Mm-hmm.
freshman playing Division I baseball. There's a learning curve there.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a little bit of some JUCO guys coming in, and I mean, last year's team, and I don't try to consistently go back to the past, but you had guys that have been playing together for a few years, and you had fifth year seniors, even guys having that COVID year to where they really had an understanding of, okay, like this part of the field, whose ball is that, and like if the ground ball is coming here, where do I need to be lined up for Matt to make that toss to me or for Layden to make that toss to me? But then also too, there's been a little bit of just some guys just haven't had a good glove in the field, and there's been some errors that you can't make, and some guys haven't had the bat. And you look at an MLB season, it's 162 games, and your goal is to win the division. You look at college baseball, and most teams, you have to win the conference championship to make tournament play, and you only get 55 games. So you have 2/3 less of a season to work things out. Unfortunately, you can't give guys 20 games to get out of whatever slump they're in. So that forces the coaches at any school to mess with to rearrange the lineup, and then now you've got guys that you thought were going to be playing second base, like Hector Rodriguez. He's over at third base. Matt King, based on who else is in the lineup, is going back between short and third because Matt's got that flexibility. So I think it's hard for guys to kind of get into that groove because there's been so much fluctuation of the lineup.
And to extend your MLB comparison as well, there's no spring training in college baseball, right?
Yeah.
Like you have your fall season, but it's completely different, doing infield drills and scrimmaging, inter squad versus being on the road on an infield where the ball is moving quicker off the bat than you're used to at the bird bath and stuff like that. So I think just by the nature of how the game is played at the collegiate level, I think you got to move guys around more often, and you're just not going to see the same level of like consistency for a new player or a freshman, whether they're transfer or whatever, that you would see like in the pro level where they're going to have, a month like to actually play real games together and kind of establish that chemistry.
Yeah. And
Dan,
go ahead.
Dan, what's your temperature overall as you look at the team right here at this critical point in the season?
Well, so let's look at it two ways. I think we can be honest that where UTSA is right now as an overall program and the history of UTSA baseball, they're still a team that the best route to the postseason is going to be the conference championship. If 2 seasons ago, a 38 RPI and beating all the teams, if that wasn't enough to get into an at-large bid, the committee has shown like, okay, it's going to require a lot. So I think you put all your chips in on figuring out good baseball and figuring out how to play together, get the hitting to be more consistent, and hope that you can play really good baseball at the conference tournament and use the conference season to kind of find yourself and find what works and play aggressive baseball. But at the same time, if I'm being honest, like you just look at the record and being a game under 500, I wonder, like, do they have enough there to put together the 4 or 5 hot streak that you need to win the conference tournament? Where you're playing a couple games, playing baseball every day, playing early, playing late, playing the same team twice in 2 days, like, can they put everything together? And I mean, I think this is the coaching staff that can do it and help them find that. But that's the biggest thing is with how the first month of the season has gone, can they find a good enough streak to win 4, 5, 6 games in a row?
Yeah, my perspective is, any chance of an at-large bid to a regional, I think is out the window at this point, right? To be super
Yeah,
blunt.
I mean, they just don't have enough. Like the AAC isn't quite strong enough, and they don't have a strong enough non-conference schedule to like Charlotte plays an incredibly difficult non-conference schedule. Like we'll talk about them more in a moment, but I think their strength of schedule is 19.
Yeah.
For
I don't know
Charlotte.
what UTSA ranks, but I know it's not.
It's not that good. It's
Right.
add another digit in there, and there's like Charlotte's on the East Coast. Like there's
Mhm.
there's the ACC that's right there. There's some northern schools that can come down.
Sure.
Yep. And some of
They've
the
got a
smaller
little,
schools near them are really good, like Campbell.
yeah,
One example.
hmm But
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, I'm not sure if you were saying this or if I just implied it, but I think, like, look, these midweek games, they're not really going to matter, right? Because you're going to have to win that conference championship if you want to get a regional bid either way. So,
yeah,
I think continue to experiment and give these young guys, plenty of innings, plenty of at-bats to build their confidence and their ability. I think we're starting to see it with Diego, right? Like, he made that instant impact. I can't remember what game he got his first start. And he beat out that single at first base and ran into that massive first baseman for Greg King.
yeah.
That was one that's like imprinted in my memory from the season. But we've seen him start to blossom, and you can really see the future of him as like a standout middle infielder for this team. So I think there's going to be more opportunities for some of those young guys to step into those kind of roles in these midweek games, and the pitching staff as well. And sometimes they're going to get shelled. Like we saw the Texas State game, but I think for the betterment of the roster, for the betterment of the program, not just for this season, but looking forward as well. It's what needs to happen. But that's not to be pessimistic of like, oh, let's just give up on the season or whatever. Because I do think that it's still a talented roster, and you see those flashes, right? Some of those young pitchers that have given up a lot of runs, like their stuff is really impressive, right? They've got good movement, they can place the ball and all of that. Orlovsky, obviously, we're seeing that with him. He has some innings where he looks unhittable, like one of the best pitchers that we've seen come through in the Pat Hallmark era. But the consistency is not there. It's going to come with time. So I think, like, as fans, we got to be patient. For me personally, I mean, this is kind of what I expected with so much roster turnover. I thought the record would be a little bit better, right? Because I'm kind of surprised some of the games they dropped against the weaker competition. But overall, as far as like the lack of consistency is definitely within my range of expectations for this team, I guess I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, fair take. Well, let's transition now, and we've kind of already been touching on it a little bit. Let's get into our conference roundup. UTSA's first season in the American Athletic Conference. D1 Baseball's projections has them at 4th. This was the preseason projections back in January. Had them at 4th. Behind in this order, Memphis at 3, Charlotte at 2, ECU at 1. I mean, ECU. I didn't look this up ahead of time. We need to reach out to our friend Stephen Whitaker. For a series, I don't remember. I'd be curious the last time for a series a top 10 team came into the Birdbath, because ECU now, after this latest rankings by D1 Baseball, is number 10 in the country.
Wow,
that's a good bet that it would be the highest. And higher ranked teams have come into the Birdbath, but not for a weekend series.
Yeah,
not for a conference series either. Probably not.
We've got top 25 series last season, but not top 10.
Not top 10.
Yeah. So I mean, they're looking as good as ever. We'll talk about them more when we get to the preview. They've got a very, very talented roster. It's interesting, getting back to that record. There's 5 teams currently in the American Athletic Conference that are at either 500 or plus or minus 2 games, or less, like at the 500 level. So for the conference as a whole, it hasn't been off to a great start. And each team, like UTSA's 500 is a little different than Charlotte's. The one team that's surprising, Wichita, because their entire team went into the transfer portal last year. They had some weird things happen with head coach, but they're like 13-7 right now. So I'm curious to see like what they look like. And I heard one quote from one of their players on a different podcast, and they basically said, look, nobody's expecting us to be good. We're just going out there and playing baseball and having fun, and whatever happens, happens. So they're just playing ball and whatever. But have any teams stuck out to y'all just through looking at things, or maybe catching extra games, that you're intrigued about, or just some of the teams coming over from Conference USA with UTSA that have caught your eye?
I think just Charlotte for me. I mean, I feel like they we saw a lot of hype for them last year, and they kind of underachieved, and they kind of turned it on in the season. And then that seemed to carry over this
Mhm.
year, and it seems like they're delivering more on those expectations, right? So they're the one I've kind of had my eye on, but I haven't been following the rest of the conference all that closely, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a good answer. I've been really, really impressed with the way Charlotte's kind of come out. As far as moving in with us, we're Wichita State's pretty exciting. Tulane's pretty exciting, right? FAU came with us.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone that's in that top part of the standings so far are all really, really impressive teams, and teams that UTSA sort of has to get to the caliber to if we're going to be competitive in a conference like this on a consistent level. Um,
Yeah. And one thing that
yeah,
I'm curious about, and I'd be curious if he would offer it, Coach Hallmark's thoughts on this in terms of a preparation standpoint. And we kind of could probably predict the answer. And maybe it would be a little coach speak, but last year they had DBU like the second to last series of the season, and everything was kind
mm-hmm.
of building to that. And every weekend you're checking the standings, and DBU drops a game, UTSA sweeps, UTSA drops a game, DBU sweeps. This season it's kind of different. Like you get the top dogs right away, and right away it's going to be like, okay, where do we stack up against this conference, against the team to beat? And I think I'll be real curious to see how this weekend goes from a few different perspectives.
Dan, I want to ask you about Memphis. I was like kind of surprised in the preseason where they were at third because I just never really heard of Memphis as a baseball school. I see that their record's 11 and 12. Not sure its strength of schedule. What's been the story on the Tigers so far?
Yeah, I mean that one's been kind of interesting for me too, because I think I even mentioned like in our season preview, or maybe on another guest podcast I had with some people, whether it was Alumni Association or Meep Nation. That one caught my eye. But here's what I'll say: like they're 11 and 12, but they're leading the AAC, and I know we haven't had conference play, but if you just break down all the stats of the teams, they're leading the AAC in stolen bases, home runs, doubles, walks, and runs. But then their RPI is 163, and their strength of schedule is 136. So
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's just one of those situations where they had a big turnover, and maybe the experts are like, hey, they've got like college baseball preseason rankings. A lot of it's based on the fall, and a lot of it's based on like who you bring in. And they had a similar situation as UTSA, where they brought in a lot of guys from the transfer portal and the JUCO route, and I think guys had a really good fall. So I think that built a lot of the hype. And stat wise, they're definitely showing some good things, but record wise, like, and I haven't looked into it too much on why their record is why it is where it is, but that's definitely one that's going to be a little intriguing. And when UTSA goes up there, I'll be curious to see how that series goes.
Quick, I just pulled up the conference statistic composite. Memphis is blowing away the rest of the conference in home runs they've hit. They've hit 36. Next highest is Tulane with 29.
Wow.
UTSA 24 for reference. But their ERA for their pitching staff is by far the worst in the conference. They're sitting at 6.44 when the conference average is 4.94. So a lot of high scoring games for Memphis, I suppose.
Yeah, and as frustrating as the listeners have been watching these games that have sometimes gotten out of hand, or the home run ball, I think UTSA's team ERA right now is four. Let me get the
0.76.
yeah, 4.76. Imagine having an extra 2 runs per game that you're giving up, and how frustrating that would be.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah, it's easy to forget college basketball is just a high scoring form of baseball compared to MLB.
Uh-huh, totally.
well, they
Pitcher
use
duels
aluminum
don't come around that
bats, and
often. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And what's the tweet you always say about like football, basketball, whatever? Like in college athletics, you can have the one guy that's going to get drafted like 1-1 and be the
Yeah.
next Paul Scenes. The next guy's going to be doing your taxes someday when you sign your big deal. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that was something like, I talked to Luke Malone in the fall, And Luke was like, I love pro ball. I wake up, I play baseball. I eat lunch, I go play baseball. I go to sleep, I think about baseball. Like I don't have to be in class. I don't have to study. I don't have to do homework. I don't have to do an assignment on the bus. I just do whatever I want. I think about baseball. I work on baseball, you know? It's such a different aspect.
Dan, you talk about, as we look at conference schedule coming up, you talk about it being top heavy this season and having to play DBU last year towards the end of the year. Well, in May of 2024, we have Wichita State, we have FAU, we have South Florida. Any of those teams do you see being contenders whenever we get down to the end of the season?
Yeah, South Florida, they had a lot of guys show up on so the AAC and all conferences do this, but the American has like the coaches poll come out at the start of the season, but then they also have like the preseason like conference like all team come out, and South Florida has had a surprising amount of guys on there, especially like their infield. So I kind of have been keeping an eye on them all, the first month of the season. I think South Florida has the potential to be kind of sneaky good. And I think that if they're not right there with ECU as a potential regular season champ, I think South Florida could kind of have a similar route as Charlotte did last year in the tournament where they put it all together. And I mean, Charlotte, like they beat ECU in the conference tournament and then they made a regional final. They were a game away from going to a super regional, and you get to a super regional, anything can happen. But um yeah, I mean, I think Wichita is going to balance out a little bit. I think they'll kind of find some middle ground and kind of plateau. I could be wrong.
Mm,
The thing about
okay.
Wichita, from a conference standpoint, ECU's never made it to Omaha. Wichita is the only team in the conference that has made it to Omaha. So,
Wow.
as
Crazy.
perennial as ECU has been, they've never climbed the super regional ladder
Hmm.
and made it to
Mm,
Omaha. So,
wow.
Yeah. Two notes on Wichita State and South Florida. Both of those series are at Roadrunner Field, and both of those teams have struggled on the road. Wichita
yeah.
State's 9-3 at home, 4-4 away, and South Florida's 9-5 at home and 3-4 away. So if that
Mm,
holds up throughout the rest of the season, that bodes well for UTSA.
yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
sort of deep analytics stuff, Jared. That's
Mhm.
beautiful.
That's what
That's
happens when
good
you get a
stuff.
27-inch monitor and you put two screens side by side.
I keep telling myself I need to up my like
I'm
yeah,
imagining Dan with like the ultra wide curved monitor with like 5 different box scores.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Oh, man.
I wish. Let me if I can, because I know we're starting to get a little long-winded from what we kind of talked about beforehand. I want to touch on really quick before we get into the series preview against ECU. So this new thing, and I haven't mentioned it too much because I'm still waiting to see like how the committee approaches it. But D1 Baseball is partnering with 643 Charts to come up with a new ranking, and they're calling it Diamond Sports Ranking. And the goal is to replace RPI, because RPI is an outdated, flawed system. RPI is the system where you play a team like Rice if they're having a bad year, and just by playing them, even if you beat them, it hurts you in the standings. And then if
Mm,
you lose, it hurts even worse. So there's a lot of
mm,
inconsistencies with it, a lot of flaws. Diamond Sports Ranking, it factors in margin of victory. It factors in a team like when you actually play them versus, hey, we beat a team when they were good in the RPI and then they crapped the bed, and now that RPI is really hurting us. So and the thing I posted yesterday, I think it kind of went unnoticed just with the timing and everything, but UTSA's RPI going into yesterday's game was 137. Their Diamond Sports ranking was 81. Which
wow.
still isn't enough for an at-large bid from a mid-major perspective, but it just shows by incorporating a few other metrics and looking at and factoring in strength of schedule. UTSA has a decent strength of schedule at the moment. How much of a difference it can make. So I encourage people to kind of keep your eye on that and pay attention to that just moving forward. I just wanted to touch on that real quick as we're talking about different teams, but.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark contrast with 60 odd spots. And the truth
Mhm.
is probably somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
But maybe it is closer to the Diamond Sports ranking than it is the RPI.
Time will tell, right? Time will tell. Well, let's people have been listening for a while. Let's take a quick Cumbia break, if that's all right, and we'll come back and we'll preview the ECU, the number 10 in the country, ECU Pirates coming to the Bird Bath. All right, well, welcome back from the Cumbia break, and as mentioned before, we're going to be previewing the ECU Pirates. They actually here's the stat I want to give you guys right off the bat. And it didn't work out when I dropped this little nugget before the DBU series last year, but UTSA is 2-2 all time versus ECU. The only time they've played them before, and I get a little stitious about baseball. I don't get superstitious. I get a little stitious, but the only time they played him before was 2014, which was 10 years ago. It was the only time that they were both in the Conference USA. ECU was on their way out to the American. UTSA obviously would stay in Conference USA until last year. The regular season series was in May, and they went 1-2 against ECU, some pretty closely contested matches or games. And then they faced off in the second round of the conference tournaments where UTSA defeated them in the second round. That was the ECU has only missed the NCAA tournament 3 times since 2015, or I'm sorry, since 2011. And 2014 was one of those times. So, UTSA didn't go. They went the year before. They lost in the finals to Rice in 2015. But I thought that was a little interesting. 10 years later, it was ECU's last year in Conference USA. It's our first year at AAC, and I don't know, maybe some magic can happen this weekend.
I have no recollection of being in a conference with ECU.
Yeah. Well, just 1 year, so I mean, who knows if football, maybe football didn't even play him that year.
Definitely not.
I mean, that would have stuck out to you, I think.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No, definitely not. Yeah, it's good. I like that. I like that story.
But I'm waiting for next year. I'm hoping next year they go to Greenville. I can go out to the jungle and watch that. But let's talk about their team a little bit. So D1 baseball does something where every year they put out a top list of, they do a lot of things, top freshmen, top prospects. But the one I always like to look at, they do the top 50 position players, top 100 outfielders, and top 150 pitchers. ECU has 8 players on that position list. I think 3 pitchers and 5 position players. So just on the mound, in the field, just top to bottom, some very good players. And it's showing right now 15-4. Their starters are 8-1 in games of record that their starters have logged. So a great presence on the mound. Their offense, I feel like, lines up pretty good, or pretty even with UTSA in a lot of things. But did anything stand out to you guys when you were checking them out, or anything catch your eye?
This Cunningham guy slugging 808 jumped off the page to me.
Yeah, Carter Cunningham, 455 batting average. Yeah.
Jeez.
Oh my gosh.
Adrian, I know you're a big name guy. ECU has the number 3 starting pitcher in the country. Definitely probably see him on Friday night. His name is Trey Yesavage.
Yeah, I saw that. Oh my gosh.
We'll give a little kudos to them, but talk about a name for a pitcher that's just slinging it. He's averaging 6 innings pitched in all of his outings. He's got a 1.20 ERA, 49 strikeouts. He's like 5th in the country in strikeouts. His whip, for those that might be a little unfamiliar, whip is walks plus hits in innings pitched. His whip is 0.70. He's averaging less than 1 whip in his outings.
Just cruising through innings. That's crazy.
Yeah, 14.70 K per 9.
I really like that it's YE. you savage. It's like it almost has like a more grittiness to it whenever you say it all in all
Yeah.
together like that. It's incredible. It's just incredible. I love it.
Another guy I want to shout out is Riley Johnson. Reason I'm shouting him out is because he's got 12 stolen base attempts on the season, with 10 of them being successful. UTSA's best base stealer this year has been Mason Lytle, who's 8 of 8. So, you know, what, 20% more stolen base attempts than UTSA's top base runner?
Mm.
Yeah, and Riley also has 14 walks, which is 3 better than UTSA's best. That Caleb Hill has 11.
Yeah. So,
Caleb might have been hit by the pitch more. Caleb's been hit by pitch 5 times.
Oh.
He has a tendency to wear it a little bit. Let me see. Riley Johnson's been hit by pitch 7 times actually. So Riley has walked more, and he's been no 5. I'm sorry. Jacob Starling's been hit 7 times. Riley Johnson's been hit 5 times. So they're pretty comparable. But yeah, very patient at the plate. Some dangerous stuff.
yeah, and I guess a lot of times you give up 4 balls to that guy, it turns into 2 bases. So that's really tough on the pitcher.
Yeah. The other thing that stood out to me about their pitching, because they have another guy that, Zach Root, and his numbers are very similar to Trey Savage, but of their 72 runs allowed, 66 of those have been earned. So only a 6-run differential between runs and earned runs. So a pretty clean defense. And we talked about this with UTSA. UTSA's runs is 106, but their earned runs are 93. So they've allowed 13. There's a differential of 13 there of runs versus earned runs. And I mean, we know that, right? Like we've seen some games where there's been like 3 errors. I think one weekend there was like 3 errors in back-to-back games. And so
pretty good number of fielder's choices too, stuff like that.
Yep, for sure.
Like that play in San Marcos where Owen like fielded that ground ball and Olivio wasn't there at first base. Like I don't think they score that as an error, but definitely a defensive miscue that cost a run in and out.
Yeah, and that is one thing I've heard. I heard specifically about this past weekend. There was a moment where the official scorers gave Olivo a hit, and I was surprised. Like from the get-go, I was like, well, that's an error. And then they threw it up as a hit, and it kind of split both defenders. And Coach Hallmark actually went back after the fact and said, no, you need to mark that down as an error. And he had them change it. And he's like, hey, I want to be equal. Like, I don't want to help our guys just because we're home or whatever. And so I appreciate that with the transparency there. And I mean, it's hard. Like there's a lot of moments where, I don't know the who's doing the official scoring at UTSA and what their background is, but there's definitely some plays where it's like, that could go either way. So I understand how they can tend to err on the side of caution. But one thing that I thought was interesting too, from the plate, they're only hitting 299 as a team. That's actually 3/100ths of a point smaller than UTSA, or less than UTSA, but their batting average on balls in play is 333. So it seems like they're a team that if they make contact, they're placing the ball really well. And it's going to be interesting too, because like we've seen with UTSA, they can kind of get into a little bit of a predicament with the pitching and give up some pretty hard hits back to back. So definitely keep an eye on that and how all of that goes.
Dan, I've been out of the sabermetrics game for a while, but isn't it generally understood that if your BABIP is way higher than your batting average, you're like due for a breakout, and like a lot of those hard hit balls are bound to find the gap at some point?
Yeah, and that's what we were seeing last year. With guys like Taylor Smith, Antonio Valdez, and even Caleb Hill.
Right.
He was a newcomer last year, hitting the ball really hard, and it just wasn't falling. And then it turned around, and obviously a very potent offense, and that's baseball, right? That's some of it. Like they joke, like, oh, you hit the ball 110 miles an hour off the bat, and it goes right to the guy, and then you hit a little dribbler at 37 miles an hour, and you get on base, and it balances out. But definitely some truth to that for sure.
Is that making concern for the series this weekend? Roadrunner Field's pretty pretty batter friendly park, I'd say.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have no idea what to expect. I mean, on paper we know, but there's a reason that they play the game, right? I think what I want to see is, and this gets back to like what we were talking about earlier with expectations and everything moving into conference play. I want to see this team and you've seen it at points, but I want to see them continue to like have competitive at bats. And like there's just been a lot of like moments where it's like strike three looking,
Mhm.
maybe watching some pitches, maybe some timidness at some points, but I want to see them kind of just play ECU competitively and hard. And I think they will. I think you could make an argument that they've stepped up when they needed to. Maybe Grand Canyon hasn't worked out exactly the way people thought it would, in terms of their team, but that's a team that was projected to win the WAC, and they came into San Antonio, and UTSA could have very easily swept all three of those games if the defense was a little
Mhm.
better, and they kind of hurt themselves a little bit, and that's why they didn't sweep. But I just want to see. That's what I think. That's the main thing I want to see out of this weekend. It's ECU. It's the 10th ranked team in the country. Like you got to win a game. You just for your confidence and everything. You got to win a game. But I want to see how they stack up just in the fight. And we've seen that, right? Like we've seen them battle. I mean, heck, last night they scored 4 runs in 2 innings, the eighth and ninth, and just short of a crazy comeback. But they kept battling and they kept coming back. So
Yeah, and it kind of answered there just exactly what I was thinking. This is a hell of a measuring stick for UTSA to come up against in their very first AAC matchup. And I think that's exactly what you want to see from them. You want to see them be competitive. You want to see them give ECU a tough time and definitely get out there with one win. And you talk about how close the margins have been. It feels like we're on the cusp of having that win when the close game, breaking out, if you will. Why not against ECU? If you can steal a game from them, I really think it'll bolster a lot of confidence for this team and maybe give them some momentum as we talk about. It's a game of momentum. I mean, maybe they could be hot coming into the beginning of conference with just a win over ECU and giving them some tough battles whenever they do lose to them.
This is kind of
yeah,
off
for sure.
topic, but I just want to say like how cool that, as UTSA fans, like there's like a $1.52 million donation to athletics this week. Women are hosting a women's NIT basketball playoff game on campus on Thursday. And then on Friday, you get a top 10 baseball team coming to campus again. I
Mm,
don't know, man. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
just
I keep
regular
trying to have
stuff.
these moments of gratitude for the athletics program.
Just a regular weekly schedule at the UTSA, baby. Incredible.
Yeah, a lot happening, and we'll see. Hopefully the weather cooperates, and I mean, if anything, just have some good baseball. So
Yeah. I'm going through this ECU roster a little deeper, and their names are just like incredible. Corey Costello, that's a great baseball name. Jason Janesco, love it. Nathan
Oh,
Crimson,
yeah.
Nathan Crimson. You want to see that guy
That's solid.
at the plate?
That's solid.
Bottom of the ninth? I don't think so. And then you got Walker
Yeah.
Barron. Come on,
That's a good one. I saw that one. That
pitchers
one's
are
a really
terrified
good
of that
one.
guy.
Yeah.
yeah,
Great stuff.
Yeah.
I do want to touch on a little bit. Did y'all catch it all the ECU Parker Bird story?
Sounds familiar. Is he the guy missing an arm?
A leg, yeah. He
A
lost
leg, yeah,
before
yeah.
before he graduated high school. He lost his lower leg in a boating accident, and
Mhm.
actually, I think opening weekend maybe suited up and
Wow.
got in at bat, got a plate appearance, and I mean they were talking about it like the experts were talking about it on the podcast. Like it wasn't in any way, it wasn't like a handout. It was like, hey, like Parker's got to come into camp,
Yeah.
he's got to earn a spot, he's got to play hard and everything, and he earned that moment. But pretty, like goosebumps, and it's one of those moments where I think as fans, you put down the navy orange colored glasses, you put aside the rivalry, and you're like, listen, how can you not be romantic about baseball? And like something like that at that age, like when I was in the Air Force and the job I had some opportunities to be around some people and help transport some people that were in situations like that. And what I'm thinking about from my side is like, this person just had something happen that's going to be life altering. And so for him to be the quality baseball player he is and have something like that occur at that age, I can't even imagine what that was like to go through. But such a neat story, and put aside and I know we don't have a lot of bad blood with ECU, but just, you know, yeah, so incredible to see.
Yeah, well said.
When I was young, our neighbors were playing in Waco, and it was like the state Little League championships. Like the winner goes to Pennsylvania and plays in the
Mhm.
Little League World Series.
Wow.
And the team they played had a kid that had one arm,
Hmm.
and he played outfield, and he would field a pop up with his glove on his one hand, and then he would, slide his glove off with like his shoulder that didn't have an arm. I'm sorry, it's like crude language. I'm sorry if that's insensitive. But then he would like grab the ball from there and then just fire a laser, back to field it in. And then, he batted with one arm as well. It was the craziest thing to see. It's just that's like one of the beautiful things about baseball, man. It's like you can be such a high level athlete with like still like quote unquote limitations and still be competitive, man. It's fascinating.
Yeah, for the baseball sickos, but also the older listeners that may have grown up watching Boy Meets World. um, Jim Abbott, Major League Baseball player Jim Abbott, made a cameo appearance in one of the episodes, and he was a one-handed pitcher, and he actually threw a no-hitter,
Wow.
played for the Yankees. So it's incredible. Well, we are, I think we're a little past an hour. Our goal was an hour, give or take, plus or minus a few minutes, but we'll wrap things up here. Appreciate if you're still listening, if you're still with us. Adrian, if you're okay with this, I want to kick it over to you for this, but you want to talk about the store updates, specifically some of the baseball things that can be coming people's way very, very soon, and give an update on that?
Yeah, I would love to. Incredible stuff happening at the Alamo Audible Fan Shop. We've definitely put more work into this particular set of our product than we have before. Look, we've learned a lot in launching a store over the last 12 months. And so now we're starting to run it a little bit more tight ship, I suppose, and to try to do all of our due diligence as store owners and bring you all the best products that we can. And I do think these are the best products that we've ever come up with. It's awesome, awesome stuff. Um, this is going to be a big expansion of our hat line. We've also got some performance gear coming out, some t-shirts coming out, the baseball 3/4 sleeve, another rendition of that coming out, and beautiful, beautiful design to not just represent the Roadrunners and the Birds, but San Antonio as a city and the institution that we represent as the Roadrunners. And so trying to really represent that Say Town, that SA, that 210, the Alamo City, Military City, Countdown City. Yes, indeed. I think everyone's going to like it a lot. We've gotten incredible feedback so far, and some really even more baseball specific items representing the Birds. And I can't wait to see some people rocking it at the Bird Path.
Yeah, I think one of the hat designs, I think even non-UTSA fans in San Antonio would love it and rock it. So,
Yeah.
if y'all want to see what that stuff looks like, we've been posting some teasers. Dan's had a few on Twitter. We've had a few behind the Patreon paywall in our community message board. So go hop on the Patreon app or the website now. You can join the chat on the website if you want to get a sneak peek at that stuff, but dropping really, really soon.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I love it. The baseball stuff looks great. I'm happy to have a baseball related merch item in the performance tee, because I love wearing that performance tee. It's great at all seasons of San Antonio weather, and you can wear it at a bunch of different points. But as far as this episode, we'll wrap it up. Thanks again for listening. This weekend, if you have a chance to get out to the field, Friday night, 6 p.m., Saturday to Sunday, 1 o'clock. But if not, you have a wonderful and very vibrant ESPN Plus broadcast that you can watch. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out yet, definitely give that a look and watch it. And, you'll be very surprised at the product you're seeing compared to last year, and hopefully the on-field product from UTSA can match it this weekend. So,
I mean, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having us on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Birds up.
Birds up.